to stop talking. He knows better than that. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to this week's Signal to Noise Live. Thanks for joining us today. As always, in fact, I think even more so today than in previous weeks, we really want your feedback on this show. So please be sure to comment. In particular, we want feedback from you on what you think the top issues are that ag is following in this last week of the election. We're going to discuss a little bit of that, share our thoughts on it, but I think it's more important that we hear what your thoughts are. What's on top of your mind as we approach the election on November 3rd. Jim, you and I have gone through the list. We're going to talk, obviously, about the final debate last night. We're going to talk about those issues for ag going into the final week. We're going to talk about some of the House and Senate races of note, some updates on China trade this week, and a new land speed record powered by E85. We'll get into that a little bit as well. Anything else to add onto the list?
Attitudes inform country with higher prices, higher attitudes. So I'm definitely seeing that. And I made my first travel speech earlier this week to the Greenbrier, to the crop insurance agent. So maybe a little aspect on that one.
Oh, yeah. And who did you talk to there?
The crop insurance agents. It was fun.
More importantly, what individual did you talk to there?
David Wasserman of the Cook Political Report. Yeah, it was fun.
So we'll see what David Wasserman had in his crystal ball as well. Scott checking in already says dairy farmer concerned about animal ag and the Green New Deal and new regulations. We'll get into that in the show when we get to that point as well. Thanks for that comment there, and keep them coming in the comment section there on Facebook. Yes. All right, you ready to go, Jim?
Yeah, we're ready.
All right, here we go. In 3, 2, 1. It's Friday, time for DC Signal to Noise with me, John Hareth, and Jim Whitmire from Pro Farmer. And Jim, a lot of things to cover this week. First of all, thanks to those folks who are tuning in live on the AgriTalk Facebook page. If you're listening to the podcast, be sure next week to tune in at 2 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central on the AgriTalk Facebook page, and join in the conversation in the chat there. We're going to talk about last night's debate. We're going to talk about some of the congressional races. We're going to talk about what's concerning agriculture as we get into the last week of the campaign. Of course, we're going to talk China, and we're going to talk a little E85 this week. So let's get right to it, Jim, starting with the debate last night. We finally had a true debate. As we were talking before the show, I really last night was one of the ones that I really enjoy. Not only because it was a true debate and we heard a lot and learned a lot about both candidates, but for me it is so entertaining and fun and enjoyable to sit down and have a text going with Chip Flory and Sean Haney, and then later on you joined in, and just hearing everybody's perspective on what was being said, because we all catch different things. We all see things in a different way. Yes. And it's really helpful to me to get that check on some different perspectives on what's going on in the debate.
Yeah, well, we all know Haney's wrong all the time, but at least you need to know what he's saying.
He's not wrong. He's just Canadian, so you have to have the conversion factor.
Yeah, I noticed the feedback when I was watching it, but once I get fixated on what I agree with you, it was finally a debate, and Kristen Welker did a magnanimous job of researching the questions and very good follow-ups, because John, as a journalist, it's frequently your follow-up questions that are the best. And she moved it along, but yet they had a spirited intercourse between the two that didn't get out of hand in most situations.
Yeah, what was so masterful in her handling of that debate last night was when the candidates tried to come back and say, no, wait, I want to say something more about that. And she did a very good job of allowing that feedback, but keeping it very tight and keeping the debate on track and not just letting them wander once they regained that control for a few seconds. She gave it to him for a few seconds, but then very sternly took control back of the conversation to keep it moving. Also, when some of the candidates were just answering questions outside of their 2 minutes uninterrupted, she did a good job when they started to wander to reel them back in and bring them back to the focus of the conversation. I thought just a masterful job last night.
Absolutely. And you heard President Trump actually compliment her into the debate, and I think his confidence of her, because she asked some pretty particular questions on both of them, but it's been kind of surprising to have the bulleted type, questions at the Democratic candidate, and I think that relaxed him. To a degree, as much as he can be, relaxed, and I think it helped. It helped the debate, and we saw, as I wrote this morning on ProFarmer.com, it showed the huge gaps in policy between the two candidates and the two parties, and it aired a number of the sensitive issues out.
Yeah, I think you saw Trump evolve a little bit over the course of the debate. When he started out, it was, I think, very much the Trump that his handlers wanted, and it was effective. Not only did he come across as more in charge of, quite frankly, of his thoughts of the administration, but also he hit on something that you and I talked about after the first debate. Was in that first debate, he took away the opportunity for Joe Biden to wind himself around a post. And there were a couple of moments last night where Donald Trump, somewhat forced because of the mute button, but allowed Joe Biden to kind of wind down a thought without any real good conclusion, which he is wont to do sometimes when he is given an open-ended time like that. And Trump took away that advantage in the first debate by constantly interrupting and not allowing Joe Biden that window of opportunity to wind a bit.
That definitely helped. And I also liked it. It gave him the opportunity, and Biden, the opportunity to watch their reactions when the other one was speaking. And it was vivid when Biden, started talking about fracking and the oil industry, and Trump clearly knew that he had an opening there, and you could just see it from his face. And then he was ready with the retort right after that. Those are the things that I've learned to really watch for and like in any debate. And vice versa, when you saw Biden wince sometimes, I think he smiled too much, derisively on a couple issues. But I just like an airing out of the issues in a somewhat calm fashion, and I think we did it. We had it.
Yeah, we finally got that. And I will say, my estimation of the debate, Donald Trump overperformed what I expected. Joe Biden didn't do anything of great detriment to himself. So given the fact that we're this late in the game and that Joe Biden is, if you believe the polls, is has a substantial lead here, I think that debate was at best a draw. But had we had that debate, that exact same debate 3 weeks ago, I think the advantage out of the debate would have been for Donald Trump.
Well, it would have been for Trump initially, but I don't know whether I buy the draw. Now, I know it's the commentators said if he didn't get that knee bent issue with Biden, that meant Biden won. I don't accept that at all. What I think it did for Trump in this one, and now we're going to have to watch into the next week, maybe Wednesday forward, some of these Cadillac polls to see if he did, garner some more, positive impacts. I think he was focusing on his base, which I think it's errant to look at some of these independents, if you will. He has to get more people from his base to actually vote, John. And he got into that area with the Black American voters, especially the men. I thought he was quite succinct and to the point when he addressed the prison reform, the opportunity zones among Black Americans, of what he did. And then he countered that with the 8 years of the Obama Biden administration. Then in the energy area, he looked right into the camera and said, I hope you heard that, Texas, Pennsylvania, and Oklahoma. And that scored some points. I used to debate, and that was a scoring of the points in both cases.
Yeah, in fact, I noted that so some of us some of the people on our chat were questioning Trump, interrupting and going on there. And I said, no, that was the oil point was something he needed to underscore at that moment. And I thought that was definitely a point scored for the Trump administration. On the minority issues, though, I agree that the prison reform was substantial. I don't know, and I obviously, as an old white guy, I can't comment on how this will impact, but I wonder how that prison reform balances against the president's reaction to the George Floyd incident and the protests and the rioting and all that, and Charlottesville. I just don't know how those two balance out in the electorate, and that's one of the exciting stories I'm going to be watching on election night to see how that does balance out.
Yes, and I will too, especially in some key southern states that may tip some Senate elections, Georgia and other areas, South Carolina, because the internal polls that I understand, talking to the Trump people, say he's in the double digits in the Black American vote. If that's the case, John, it could tip some Senate races down south. That's how important it is.
That is, and as you and I discussed in the chat last night, it's also significant because minority, in particular Black voters, are oftentimes undercounted in polling. So that could skew from what we're seeing in some of these polling results.
Yes. And to be balanced, Biden, I thought, did a better job under the 545 kids that they don't know where their parents are. Now, I don't think Trump responded to that in the best way. He could have been a little, had more empathetic on that. Even though he scores some points on immigration policy, I do think that Biden scored a point in that area. So it definitely was not one-sided whatsoever. At the beginning, that was the best response I've heard Trump give in his COVID-19 policy. It was very coherent, where in the past it's been scattered shots. So again, that's what I observed, and the lines that he said we're going to have to live with the virus, and then Biden said we're going to in essence we're going to have to die with the virus as well. So point counterpoint.
Yeah, indeed. Greg checking in saying, Farm Report, not your political views. Well, you're checking it on the wrong show here, Greg. Go someplace else. It's not our political views, though. It's our analysis of how the politics played out last night.
Yes. Yes.
This is certainly not our own political views. But so bottom line, though, in last night's debate, Jim, do you think there was any net change in the electorate out of that?
I don't know. But we're going to see in the polling, as I said, from about Wednesday forward. But it's clear most of the election year experts are seeing a trifecta of a Democratic win, the White House and the House and Senate. We're going to see whether or not only this debate, but in the coming votes, whether or not that's a fair assessment by the election year watchers.
All right. Well, what are some of the X factors that could play into this over the next week? I mean, we've already got some 45 million votes already baked in. So we can see even less of an X factor now because there are that many fewer votes that can be affected in the remaining week. But Jim, is there anything that could really sway this election in one remaining week?
Well, to get out and increase the number of people for either Trump or Biden that weren't going to vote. So that's what debates can do sometime. It can energize your base, and especially in those key states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and other areas that we had in 2016. That can make a difference on who is voting and how many.
All right. Well, Jim, let's get into what the issues are that Ag is tracking in this final week of the election. We've had a couple comments already about this. Again, Scott saying, I'm a dairy farmer concerned about animal ag and the Green New Deal and new regulation. And then Russell saying articles info related to California Prop 12 focuses on the cost to U.S. Livestock producers, but compliance, facility remodels, etc., will result in increased food costs. any economic forecast is how much. Of course, lower income producers are harmed the most. So let's get into some of these issues. The regulation thing is something I hear over and over and over again from farmers and ranchers and rural residents. That's really top of mind in this election.
Yeah, and and it's clear the differences between the two parties in the regulatory area. There's not a right and wrong in essence, but Republican administrations typically deregulate and Democratic administrations regulate. The deciding element to have good policy relative to regulations is if you have cost benefit analysis, i.e., they're going to be unfunded mandates, so they better have more benefits than cost. We haven't seen that in a number of cases, and that's one of Trump's signature issues. His deregulation, and what you hear is one of his strengths. So yeah, and I think Democrats in ag policy, if they get in that trifecta area where I mentioned before, in the past they've typically looked to the food and nutrition industry in the regulatory arena. So that would be one potential impacts here, John, if the Democrats get back into power.
Well, and Jim, it seems to me, I want to see if you agree with this, that cap and trade and waters of the U.S. seem to have long legs in the memory of U.S. farmers and ranchers, that there is an erosion of trust with the Democratic Party because of those two issues.
Yeah, on the waters of the U.S., I think there will be some Democrats, if they get back into power, again, across the board, but definitely in the White House, to maybe temper the Trump administration's movement on that issue, on the waters of the U.S. Rule. On the case of cap and trade, there has been a change over the last, I'd say, 4 to 6 years, relative. That goes through two administrations there. On the climate change relative to aspects like carbon credits, because as I've said before on the program, agriculture now wants to participate relative to the carbon credits because many of them see that as the next revenue stream in agriculture, especially among, I know, corn growers who are looking post Renewable Fuel Standard program. Not saying that the RFS is going to go away, but it won't be as important as it used to be. So I think we're in the process of changing attitudes relative to the carbon areas on that topic, and that's unfolding. We don't know the final outcome, but I can definitely see it here in D.C. amongst both the lobbyists and both at the Republican and Democratic levels, more open-ended as far as what they'll talk about and accept, John.
Yeah, and I would agree that on the legislative side, there has been a change. There's a lot more carrot than stick. Like cap and trade was going to be a lot more stick than carrot. But I think the ghost of cap and trade are going to make that process forward a lot more difficult just because of the trust issue in farm country.
I agree. But that's why education, we've had more than a few hearings on this topic over the last few years. So one cannot say it has not been aired out as an issue, but I think it'll, climate change will be one of the three issues, infrastructure, climate change, and healthcare for any Biden administration. And so if that's the case, we're going to really air out those issues, both from the congressional hearing and then from, all the pressures involved on those issues relative to the grassroots and, lawmakers on both sides of the issues.
All right. And again, if you're watching live on Facebook, please throw in the comments what issues you're watching in the final days of this race. That's what we really want to hear, is what's on your mind and what is going to be driving your decision. And Margot, thanks for checking in with your kind comments there. Jim, another issue that I've really seen growing in intensity in the last week, maybe 2 weeks, is taxes. There really seems to be a focus on this. I know the Trump administration has been trying to focus on this, and it seems to be getting some traction in farm country.
Well, you have with the Biden plan, he will increase the individual income for those making 400,000 or above. He would have an increase, a rather large increase in the capital gains, where some in agriculture, now these are the larger operators, would get nervous, is his likely return to estate taxes near to the levels where they were before, and also a change in basis. Now that's basically like a capital gains approach. That has some concern in that regard, John. But you need money to spend on some of these $4 trillion programs, and while that won't pay for it all, that's where a chunk of that will come from, for the big increase in corporations as well. So yeah, anytime you raise your taxes, that is a concern in farm country and other areas of the country.
Yeah, and in particular, that stepped up basis issue on death, that combined with the estate tax really could make it very difficult for not only farm operations but small businesses to hand down the business from generation to generation.
Yeah. See, this is why some of the most sensitive issues, again, let's just conjecture, let's assume, just for sake of argument, that the Democrats control both chambers of Congress. Well, in the Senate especially, that will still be close, no matter what the results are on election night or whenever we get the final tally. It's still going to be a very close Senate. I think it'll be 50-50 or 51-49, take your political party. But if it's 50-50 and Biden wins, that means, like, say, for an issue like doing away with the 60-vote filibuster, the Democrats would need even more than 50, because Senator Manchin from West Virginia, a Democrat, has already said he doesn't want to do away with the filibuster. So on election night, you have to look at the number over 50 if you're a Democrat, to see whether or not the party has some wiggle room. And on some of these other sensitive issues in the tax areas that you mentioned, that could be a harder to get legislation if it's a very close Senate. It's not going to be as easy as people think, even though they would have a vice president break ties, because of some Democrats would not agree with some of those taxes that they want to do.
Yeah, I thought Peggy Noonan in the Wall Street Journal had a really insightful observation, saying that Republicans maintaining control of the Senate could be the best thing that could happen for Joe Biden, because it provides insulation against the far left of his party and allows him to operate as a centrist where he seems to be most effective.
I agree with that. I think we would see a better Biden as a result of that. And his history shows, when he was a younger lawmaker, that he walked across the political aisle. Yeah. So he has a history of doing that. So definitely, I think any President Biden, his biggest hurdles is going to be the far left in his party. AOC +3 is now the phrase is, because the Sanders crowd are definitely going to try to move him to a very aggressive left tone. So I don't think he'd cry without the Senate, but he would never say that publicly.
Probably not. One other issue I'm hearing of importance to agriculture in this debate, in this election, is the push by the Biden team for electric vehicles and electric vehicle infrastructure. Obviously, the concern in agriculture is that reduces the need for and the demand for ethanol.
Yeah, when you extend the dots out, I mean, that is what it's saying there. And that's why you missed a point in the debate when your campaign has to clarify what your candidate said. And in the case of the energy policy, that's what occurred with a Democratic candidate, Joe Biden. But that's why, a number of producers and ethanol producers are somewhat nervous when they hear the talk of this. Now, what what Biden should have said is the number of years that it's going to take to unroll his energy policy. But that clearly put the focus on where's the future of fossil fuel production. Again, to be fair, Biden later said he wanted to end the subsidies for the crude oil industry. So it looks like he's going to have to get that reasoning better down pat, because I think his debate on that one last night potentially will hurt him in some key states.
Yeah, it could very well, and not because of the ethanol issue, but because of petroleum issues.
Yes.
In that discussion. But Jim, isn't this march towards electric vehicles? Doesn't it have a sense of inevitability about it at this point? I mean, your point is well taken about the timeline, but I think that march is already on, and I think, at least in my view, I don't think there's much that can stop it at this point. You may be able to modify it, but not stop it.
I agree. And it goes into investment money. This is why you don't have near the investment coming into the oil industry, because of where the future's lying in the electric vehicle end. And you're seeing it. And I know Biden's plan has a expenditure for 52,000 charging stations, and I think that's smart to do because you're building your infrastructure for the EVs. And frankly, that's what the corn-based ethanol industry did not do, which they should have far earlier. That they should have had the wells at the service station and then the blender pumps, etc. And that was not well coordinated. And I know the private industry in a way can take care of that. You have Tesla doing that, but boy, if we're going to eventually move pell-mell, where 60% or so in the not too distant future to EVs, you better have that infrastructure there for charging.
Yeah, indeed. One last thing about, and again, I encourage you, if you're watching live, drop a comment in the Facebook comments there about what you see as driving the debate for the presidential candidates for you at this point for ag and rural America. The last thing I had on my list, Jim, was actually something that we're not seeing talked about nearly as much as we were, and that's trade.
Yeah, well, in the debate last night, it really briefly got into China, but they didn't really air out that issue.
Now, and I'm not hearing it talked about in ag much at all now.
No, well, because we've got exports up relative in agriculture. I mean, have you looked at the soybean export number versus a year ago? I think they're about double. And corn now, we continue to get news relative to China. So I think, and that's led to $4 plus corn, where some analysts, I know if you're listening, I was on a speaking webinar earlier this week for Hamlet, and Joe Kearns, an analyst, was there, a very good analyst, and he was signaling potential for $4.75 to $5 corn. That's not me, that's him saying that, and he justified it with both fundamentals and technical analysis. And soybeans has been the leader in this, carrying both corn and wheat to a degree, and China continues to be a ferocious importer of not only U.S., Brazil, and Argentina beans. So I think there's a more of a calming effect that we're beginning to see phase one relative to China not play out entirely. They're not going to purchase $36.5 billion for this calendar year, John, but it's going to come far closer than what many, if not all, thought at the beginning of the year when the phase one agreement was announced January the 15th.
Yep. Also want to mention we got a real nice, insightful email earlier this afternoon from Brett. Had some great observations about the debate, some we've covered, but in a nutshell was talking about how he thought Donald Trump did an effective job of almost appearing to be the outsider, attacking the incumbent in the debate and coming after Joe Biden's 47-year career, which we heard repeatedly in the debate, his career in politics. And I do think that was a somewhat successful line of attack for President Trump in last night's debate.
Yeah, he more than signaled an outsider with results versus a career politician. And that's always a good a good debating point, because Americans, no matter which political parties, they in many cases they distrust Washington D.C. Not their particular lawmaker, but everyone else. So that's usually a good side to be on. Again, to be hopefully balanced, Biden had his own points relative both to COVID-19 and his, looking into the camera. I think he is a good debater that way, and saying that
Yeah, but that almost looked like a planned tool at this
it
point.
is a planned tool, yes, but it's still effective.
Yeah,
It's
but it
still
just
effective.
after it was effective the first debate, it looked so staged last night to me.
Yeah,
That
except
could
at the
just be me.
very end. I thought when they wrapped it up, what do you want to say? I would have scored the way Biden answered that question better than Trump. I think he had a good closing, a better closing point than Trump did, where he got into, and all would-be presidents say this, that they want to be a president for all Americans, but that needed to be heard. So I usually
Yeah.
tend to like, when someone says that. They both had good points. They both reached some of the targets that they wanted to do in the debate, but I'll still fall back on expanding the particular base that you're after relative to Trump, because he knows there's about 3% of Americans that are truly left on the independent side. But if he can expand the number of voters, more voters in those critical electoral states of the northern tier states, that's really what he's going for. And I think that's why he was passionate when it came to the Black American voter and other aspects of that, trying to get his true base out there, not only to come to the polls, but come to the polls in bigger numbers.
And you and I have discussed this before, but in my view, and I'll underscore with that, this is my view, but rather than there being a large number of undecideds out there, I think there are a number of people who are leaning either towards Trump or towards Biden, and wants to have a reason to cast that vote. That they're not truly undecided. They're leaning one way or another, but they just need to be given a reason to cast the vote. And I think both sides could have found that in last night's debate.
Agree. And there are a number of election year analysts that I read prior to the debate, were suggesting is a statistically significant number of Republicans just not going to vote because of what the polls showing that Biden was having a consistent near double-digit lead. I think the last few days have watered down that particular argument, but it's another reason, John, to get your views across in any debate. And it's a different way of saying what you just said.
Yeah, and again, I think for both sides, it was effective last night. For Donald Trump, probably a little more effective just because he hadn't had that kind of moment in the debates up until last night. Dennis checking in, is the carbon footprint from green energy of any significance producing the equipment to bring about that means of energy, and why isn't this mentioned in debates? It's a good point there that electric vehicles are not carbon neutral. There is carbon expended in order to create, or in many cases, there's carbon expended, unless it's through wind or solar or hydroelectric. But we are still going to have a carbon expenditure in order to have electric vehicles, and probably not figured enough in the calculus of the public discussions we've had so far, Jim.
No, and this is what Chip Flory on Agri Talk, mentions frequently as well. But it's the perception of electric vehicles that drive partially, not totally, the debate on that. The two candidates got into the future of energy in the debate, and it usually boils down to the number of jobs, where Trump says if you're going to, quote, do away with the oil industry, you're going to lose a lot of jobs. And then Biden always counters that at least some economic analysis shows that you'll have more jobs and perhaps higher paying jobs as we get greener. So, there's the debate in a nutshell. But we're still in the relatively infancy stage on going to whatever Green Deal we may have as a country, with the watered down aspects of the two strident views on some lawmakers and groups on that. But I think the die is cast, John, on this issue as well. We're going to get better and better in that carbon footprint, and and agriculture, I think rightfully so, is now trying to find a way to be a participant that can be advantageous to the ag sector,
Yeah, to make
relative
money
to
off
those
it.
carbon credit, make money on it, carbon credits. And I think that's been a wholesale change in the last few years.
Well, the other factor in all this, though, I think is probably the biggest factor that's not being talked about, is that the American consumer feels like they have been run over by the oil industry. They hate paying for gasoline, and electric vehicles offer them an opportunity, if they ever get to be affordable, offer an opportunity to give it to the oil industry and say, we don't need you anymore, even though that's not entirely true. I think that's a huge sentiment out there.
It is, and see, this is where the oil, the biofuels industry and the oil industry, interestingly so, need each other.
Yeah.
So they better quit fighting almost every other issue, and because in the future they're going to need each other. We're not going to see the end of the oil industry in the next decade. I just don't see it. However, the transition, as we said before, is clearly there, and I don't think that there's any retrenchment. I've said before, I looked back as a history major, I looked how many years it took us to go from the horse and buggy era to the automobile industry. However, at the beginning it was anemic, and from the onset it was about 20 years, and we're well into that 20-year time frame, which about another 10 years. See, that's that 10 to 15 years, but that doesn't mean the combustible engine is going to go away. It just means that the market share EVs relative to automobiles as we know them. But then you have the infrastructure there. Look at all your automobile places. They have a structural decision to make, because it gets, do you have charging stations at the stations? You have different technicians at the auto shops and all that. I'm seeing that out here in the East, when I go in to look at a car, that the owners of the establishments that I talked with say that's a big decision for them in the years ahead, which way to go. I don't think that they can afford, to go both disciplines in the combustible engine or the EVs. And you're going to see that roll out increasingly so in the not too distant future.
Yep. And we're going to come back to some engine issues in a little bit, but wrapping up at least my list on the debate last night is something that we didn't hear about. And I'm kind of surprised it didn't come up at all. And that is the Supreme Court. But Joe Biden finally listened to us, Jim. For 3 weeks now, we've been saying that he needs to appoint a commission and say they're going to look at it. Well, what did he do in the what's going to be on 60 Minutes Sunday night? Says he's going to appoint a commission to look at expanding the Supreme Court.
And that's what politicians have always done in the past. So that's why I say, why don't you, at minimum, do that? Now, I think he says, 180 days or some time frame of which they're going to have to release a report for Supreme Court reform. Well, reform is just another term, in my judgment, for packing. But he could have gotten out of a jam early on by just saying, we're going to study this. That's what whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you always say that when you don't want to decide an issue. We're going to study it.
Yep, and that's exactly what they're finally doing after a lot of lost time on it. Anything else you want to touch on in the debate before we move on, Jim?
No, I just think the viewers, the voters, you won this one for sure, and both candidates had their marks, but you've had some analysts say that Biden won simply because he wasn't dethroned. I just don't buy that argument, but I just think it gave both candidates an opportunity to run on particular issues in the 11 days remaining. So it's going to be curious to see, especially for Trump, who is behind, if you believe the polls, which areas that he sees opportunities in last night's debate that he can pluck out of it. And I think it will be that energy issue, because he did tweet on that several times already since the debate. So I think you're going to see that when he visits Pennsylvania, Texas, etc. So it's over now. Now we don't have to worry about the debates and all the pre and post and all that. So now we're going to let the public decide.
Indeed, and can't wait to see how it all plays out on election night. And again, a reminder: you and I are going to be watching that and commenting in real time on agweb.com throughout the evening on election night, and then at 9 p.m. Central, 10 Eastern, you and I are going to do a live Signal to Noise on agweb.com and some of the Facebook pages here. We'll have it on the AgriTalk Facebook page. And just talk about where we are at that point in the evening and what we know. A look at some of the key races, which is what we're going to do right now. There are a number of key congressional races. In fact, you talked to David Wasserman from the Cook Political Report at an event this week. What is he saying we need to be watching at this point?
Well, in the House, he's actually increasing his net number of seats that the Democrats will gain. So and that's his specialty, is the House. He's House editor of the Cook Political Report. And the reason he's saying that is his latest changes are favoring, more often than not totally, the Democrats rather than the House. So he sees about a 10 seat, if not more net gain, by the Democrats. And he really spent some time on Colin Peterson, the House Ag Committee chairman, during his speech. And I had a private dinner with him as well. And but I'm really taking my comments on what he said publicly. And he said the polls for Colin, 7th, congressional district in Minnesota, he said some polls show Colin up 2 points, others show him down 2 points. But where he thinks Colin is going to lose, even though generally he says it's a toss-up, but when you really press him, he thinks Colin's going to lose, because he says someone who's been in Congress right around 30 years should not be 50-50 in the polls. Right. And that smacks of a problem there. So this is one where I think Trump's focus on Minnesota, he only lost Minnesota by under 45,000 points in 2016. So he'll bring out some more voters. And two, Colin really has never had, according to David, a competitor who's not only well known but well financed, and that's the case this time in Michelle Fischbach, who was former lieutenant governor, and she has been well funded. So he would be mildly surprised if Colin won. That's how he phrased it, which tells me he inherently thinks he's going to lose. And if that's the case, he mentioned too the institutional memory that would be gone from from the House Ag Committee, and then David Scott could be one. The replacements are Costa from California, or Marcia Fudge from the Cleveland area of Ohio.
Yeah. What is Cook still looking at at the Democrats taking over the Senate? I know that has been their prediction for most of the year. Are they holding with that?
Yes. In fact, their Senate, I can't remember her name, but she said a couple weeks ago that they have a clear path to winning the Senate. The Democrats do. I would question the use of the word clear, because, as I said, David himself says that it's going to be close either way. And of course, you look at the key states, the Democrats would need a net gain of 3 seats if Biden wins the presidency, because vice president breaks ties, or 4 if Trump would win. And then you look at the very close states. Now it looks like the Democrats will lose Alabama, so that's why you say net. But it looks like they're going to win a Republican-held seat now, Arizona. He says Iowa's very close. Now, the current polls continue to show Teresa Greenfield ahead of Senator Ernst, but history shows the last few big elections in Iowa that the Republicans come on at the very end. You saw that with Governor Reynolds in her race. South Carolina right now is a toss-up, and that's a surprise. North Carolina, very close. So, but the Democrats will very likely pick up Maine, Susan Collins' seat, and I think there's another one. Well, Arizona for sure. Colorado looks like I think more than leaning on the Republic on the Democrat side. Cory Gardner looks like he's going to be defeated. So you add those up, and you can see where they're saying that what we know now, we think the Democrats are going to take over control of the Senate. I personally think that it's going to be 50-50 or 51-49. Take your pick on the party. That's why the control of the White House is going to be so important.
Yeah, and I guess the one place where I'd take issue with that is, as we discussed last week, there's probably three races that look, four races when you count Alabama. Look at four races that probably are going to flip no matter what. Pretty clear cut. But then when you get beyond that, they're all very close, and you can't expect necessarily all of them to break for the Democrats unless there is a nationwide Democratic sweep, which isn't out of the realm of possibility this year.
No.
But I don't think you'd call it likely at this point. And
well,
so
Charlie Cook says there is not a rule, but historically they tend to fall for one party when they're close, and you've seen that the last few Senate turnovers. So there is a pattern of that. So that's why it is going to be very, very close. Now we're going to learn probably early on. South Carolina, if Lindsey Graham, the Republican, going for re-election, if he loses, it could be a long night for the Republicans in the Senate. So I think we're going to know early on. Now, if he gets his victory, and North Carolina would be another one with the current incumbent Tillis, who has been consistently behind. If he were to pull it out in a victory, that
would be a very good sign for the Trump administration.
Absolutely. And so those are the things we're going to watch out for. Iowa, I think depends on the turnout. Really, I think it's in the toss-up area, even though Greenfield is ahead within the margin of error.
Yeah, but then you've also got, I think the latest poll was Biden +1, which is obviously within the margin of error. So
that's margin of error.
Yes, in the presidential race there. So,
and Michigan, we've got John James, a Republican, going against the incumbent Peters, who's not the best candidate. This is what Wasserman has said, even though the numbers again would suggest that Peters would get reelected, but that depends on so many variables right at the end, the registrations, how many people are going to vote, etc., and the Black American vote,
where they're voting,
where they're voting, and the Black American vote, it's going to be very popular in the Detroit area. So if they come out to vote, then you'd up the odds for Peters in that context. So a lot of variables, but the Cook Political Report sees across the board. They see Biden winning by about the percentage that the Real Clear Politics is playing out, that 8% area, 7 to 8% area. Now that's electoral votes is one thing, and then the popular vote, which to me doesn't mean that much. But remember, Hillary,
obviously in 2016 it didn't mean anything.
No, because around 3 million votes that she garnered above Trump, and I think I've seen some analysis that shows that Biden could win by 7 million and still possibly lose the Electoral College. Yeah. So those are the things. I don't get bogged down with the number of votes. It's those electoral key battleground states that we all know very well.
Indeed. We actually have a little bit of China trade news to talk this week. They've been ramping up their purchases, indicating that even more are coming. That with some plant or some crop challenges in some areas, and have really driven up prices here of late.
Yeah, and you could see this to me, I wrote story after story on it, what, a month or so ago, or even longer. Why USDA cannot see this is beyond me. I know our front page item in Pro Farmer has something to along the lines of China's using USDA, because USDA is waiting for an official statement from China that they're increasing that 7.2 low level TRQ for corn. But we've already sold them, export sales, not delivered yet totally, over 12 million tons, just the US. And outside the US, it looks like China has bought 5 million tons. So look at that. You're not already at the 17 to 18 million ton level. Now, there could be some differences on calendar year versus marketing year, but USDA's number, by the way, of total China corn imports is 7 million tons. They're just going to look god awful on that when the fat lady sings on this number. And I've watched the World Board since its infancy in 1977, and this is going to be one of their biggest misses. And I don't say that I like to. I just don't know what's going on at USDA. And where's our ag attaché in China on this one? If Reuters can pick up the news that they did, why can't our ag consular and ag attaché in China? I think this is quite embarrassing.
Yeah, indeed. Well, something we will continue to watch. I mean, the markets have continued to watch and really kind of ignored anything that USDA has said as they continue to sit on that 7 million metric tons number. Last item for today, I said we were going to touch a little bit more on engines and cars, and well, some big news for E85 that came out this week. The event actually happened on the 10th, I believe, when there was a new land speed record set for a production vehicle. And what's notable about it, it was set burning E85. A car from SSC went, the record is at 316 miles an hour, because you have to do 2 runs in opposite directions within an hour of each other, and then they take the average. The average was 316, but actually the top speed hit by this car on E85 was 331 miles an hour, Jim. I can't fathom.
Yeah.
Driving 331 miles.
Well, as you said, that's a success story for the ethanol, because the low carbon, high compression, for the fuel of the future.
Yeah.
So there's some good news to report in the ethanol, in the biofuel industries. And not only do they continue in this regard, and it's only going to get better, John, that's a positive argument to make, but you've got the continued efficiency of less water use. Remember, where it used to take a lot of water to produce ethanol, I think it's down over 60% from the peak, and you've got great byproducts with the DDG. So ethanol has a continued success story. So it's not going to go away in the next few years for sure.
Yeah, and it will allow us to continue to look more on these smaller twin turbo engines that can provide a good amount of horsepower if you can provide that higher compression with higher octane fuels, which of course use of ethanol is the best way, and the cleanest, cheapest, and best way to boost octane in fuel.
And I remember years ago, before the E15 battle, what even was a dream, Colin Peterson, I sat in his office and he was telling me the virtues that, well, he particularly uses in his truck, I think it was, but an old truck, E20, E25, E30 is the sweet spot. And we should be there now, because it's the sweet spot, the octane level, and it just takes tweaks on the engine to do that. So combinations of things could make the ethanol industry come back to a very sustainable product again. So it's not all negatives for the industry.
Yeah, and a reminder, if you have a vehicle that was built in 2001 or newer, you can burn E15 in it. I do it quite frequently, and if you do have I've got a problem with our local gas station that takes very, very low octane fuel and then mixes 15% ethanol in there to bring it up to 89, which, we should start with a better fuel, take it up to higher octane with the E15. You could really do well on fuel economy. But I have found many times in E15, I will actually improve my fuel economy in a vehicle over just using regular unleaded at 10%.
Okay.
So
That's all positive news as far as I'm concerned.
it is all positive news. All right. Where's more positive news? Well, let's start with the best positive news. We're in the last week, Jim.
Yep.
One last week before the election. It will be good to see all of the rancor and debate gone, but it's going to be, for political junkies like us, it is going to be a fun night to watch on election night, November 3rd.
It is. And I'm going to have my matrix down of certain counties and certain states or regions within states that could serve as a barometer, more the Karl Rove approach that I agree with, especially in the state of Florida. What counties haven't reported yet, we tend to know that in certain states, and any early signals that could forecast the night ahead. Because if you remember in 2016, it built throughout the evening that we saw that Trump went from no path to victory in the electoral college to the same being for Hillary Clinton. So there was a lot of humility as a result of the 2016. And could they be wrong again? Most people tell me, oh, they could not have two big misses in presidential campaign. So I went out looking, John, and I came up. Experts told me these are the possibilities if it's another major miss. Because as a reporter, I remember when I was a beat reporter, I would interview a lot of weather people. And I thought the best question I ever came up with a meteorologist is, if your forecast is wrong, why would it be wrong? And a lot of them didn't like to tell me. Yeah. But the ones who did, that was really salient advice, because frequently it happened. How polls could be wrong? These are the reasons. Oversampling. Polls show that Biden, with huge leads, oversampled Democrats by 6 to 10 points. And a few still sample registered versus likely voters. So you have to know about the polls that you're reading. New voter registration. This surprised me. New voter numbers are tilted heavily toward Republicans now, in some cases by 2 to 1 or more. The ground game. That usually was the forte of the Democrats. Trump campaign has been knocking on 1 million doors a week versus the very laid-back Democrat ground game. Now, that's changed in Pennsylvania. That late in the game, they started to do the knocking on the doors, John. And the last one that we talked about last week is ticket splitting. While those choosing different party candidates have lessened in recent years, that may not be the case this election, because of the fervent desire for checks and balances in Congress that many Americans do not want a carte blanche on any political party.
Yeah, and circling back to the ground game, in a typical year, I think that is hugely important. But I've got to say, this year I've had exactly one candidate show up at my door, and it felt really weird. Somebody showing up at my door in the midst of a pandemic. It was, we kept the distance and we talked a little bit, but I don't know, it didn't feel right. And I think there may be some of that play into that door to door. How it plays out in the end, I don't know, but I think it is an X factor in that.
Well, here, I know out in the East, I would hope it's like that in the Midwest, that when they come to your door, they have mask on. And then when you go to the door, you have your mask on. So I don't see anything wrong with door-to-door campaigning, because you get the brochures and you can ask questions, individual questions, if you want to. But we all like the, person to person. I saw that this week when I drove about 3 hours and 20 minutes to Greenbrier, and saw so many people I knew in the crop insurance industry. But we went out of our way to be careful, with the mask and outside receptions and things like that. But boy, it was fun again to network with the people that you have not seen at least since March. And it was just a good feeling that we all had, but we were very cautious.
Yeah, as you have to be right now.
Yes.
Well, let's wrap up with this question from Dennis on Facebook. In the end, is YouTube being an analyst? Either way the election may go, is it the end or what for things as we know? Some feel it's very crucial. We, I'll give my 2 cents first, Jim, and then I'll let you jump in.
Sure.
Um, every election cycle, we see candidates on both sides of the aisle in every race be completely demonized. We've seen it time and again in Supreme Court nominations. We saw it again, and I think unjustly so here with Amy Coney Barrett in this Supreme Court nomination. Nothing ever turns out as bad or as good as what is predicted by a campaign commercial. There is a whole lot of fear mongering. So either way, it's not going to go to the extreme that either side says. However, I think we probably have the biggest spread in ideology that we've ever had in a race, in this presidential race this year. So there will be damage depending on how the election goes. But I don't think either direction is the end of the world for anybody, which is one of the beautiful things about our system of government, that it comes down to more than just one person. There is a republic behind that office that allows for governance and allows for continuation, even if there are broad ideological swings in an election.
But if the Democrats were to have a trifecta, winning the White House, House, and Senate, there is at least the potential for major changes in those ideologies, John, to execute them. And that's where a number of people say the country will definitely change, big time. Now, we've seen sweeping changes before when, both the Democrats and our Republicans controlled, White House, House, and Senate. But the debate this year has challenged some of the long-term programs that we've had relative to true capitalism versus, and I don't say this as a mean term, economic socialism. The debate has been there. And now I think after last night's debate, it's less, I'm not saying totally, of a referendum on Trump rather than a referendum on the future of which way that you want the country to go. Hopefully in steps. And as far as demagoguery, yes, I know I heard Trump say last night that we'll go into a depression if Biden wins on the economy. I don't buy that. That's hyperbole. That's all noise. Because look at the money, both of them. Trump would still spend $5.5 trillion over the next few years, where Biden is already, he's right at $6 trillion. And a lot of that's going to be front loaded. You don't have a caving in of the stock market and financial futures, at least the next few years in that regard. So there's hopefully a balanced viewpoint, but there would be significant changes if there's a trifecta, because it would turn 180 degrees on what we've been through just the last 4 years under the Trump administration.
Yeah, which it was 180 degrees from what we had seen the previous 8 years. So, yes. And again, it was a significant change. We survived it.
Yes.
Yes. So have faith in the Republic, although we could see dramatic changes either way this thing goes.
And knowing full well if either party overreaches, there's that midterm elections where historically the party really is spanked on their behind if they overreach. So that'll be a governor on whatever, the next 2 years.
Yeah. And in fact, I think you could almost write it in now that if the Democrats win all three this time around, they will lose the Senate in 2 years.
Even though the Republicans still have a lot more up for re-election in 2022 than the Democrats. Yeah. So they would have really had to overreach in that regard. So, but that's 2 years. That's at least a little over 2 years from now. We'll worry about that after we see the results. But something tells me that Americans are pretty smart, that they're going to choose, in most cases, the right candidates, because they're not dumb at all. Many politicians think they are. Our campaigns think they are.
Yeah.
So we're going to see. We're going to see the results.
All right. Well, join us right back here again next Friday at our final Signal to Noise before the election, and then live on election night on agweb.com. Jim, as always, great conversation. Really appreciate the insights.
Sure. Anytime.
And I'm John Harris. That wraps up this week's edition of DC Signal to Noise.